Good morning again. Um, I don't know how many of you have seen Whoopi Goldberg's two movies, Sister Act or Sister Act 2, but I thoroughly enjoy them. I've seen them both a number of times and just watched Sister Act 2 a few days ago again. It was on television. And I love the fact that this woman can take these undisciplined, seemingly untalented nuns, or in Sister Act 2, these undisciplined kids, and train them to sing so wonderfully. And they're such a beautiful machine, such beautiful choirs. And so I was watching Sister Act 2 again, and she is walking down the street, and she runs into Rita, who's a student who wants to sing, but her mother says, "Listen, there's a failed singer at every corner where we live here. You've got to get a job and make some money so you can pay rent, so you can buy food, so you can take care of yourself. Singing isn't going to cut it for you." And of course, Rita is really despondent because she's a singer. And so Sister Mary Clarence, Whoopi Goldberg, says to her, she says, "Rita, there's a poet from years ago, Rene Rilke, and he wrote a book called Letters to a Poet." And she said, he has a letter in there from someone asking, what does it take to be a writer? And she said, this is Rilke's response. Don't ask me about being a writer. If when you wake up you can think of nothing but being a writer, then you're a writer. And then Sister Mary Clarence says to Rita, Rita, if when you wake up in the morning and you can't think about anything but singing, then you should be a singer, girl. And eventually, Rita takes that to heart and comes back to the choir, in spite of her mother's admonitions not to. The gospel writer of Matthew said that Jesus said, what does it profit a person if you gain the world but lose your soul? What does it gain you? If you gain the world, what does it profit you? If you gain the world but lose your soul. Soren Kierkegaard, who was a Lutheran Danish 1800s philosopher and theologian, said the most common form of despair is not in being who you are. Despair, disillusionment, disappointment, dissatisfaction, depression, also known as anxiety. And in Buddhism, we call it dukkha, commonly translated as suffering, but it has so many other flavors to it. The most common form of dukkha is not being who you are. How many of us are like that or have been like that? To find your true self. Who are you really? Not who do you pretend to be to your friends or family or whomever, but who are you really? That's why we're here, to try and find out who it is that we are really. Before we start thinking, before we start feeling, before we start having opinions or judgments or anything else, who are you? Well, I have to tell you, I was an alcoholic. I am an alcoholic, but I was a practicing alcoholic. I'm not practicing now. And I knew I needed help. Finally, it was time to address the issue. And it was interesting because I had just finished a tenure as a student pastor at a little Presbyterian church here in Royal Oak. And I started drinking again. And I had a feeling I knew why, because I always wanted to be a pastor. After I was a veterinarian, I wanted to become a pastor. And that's what I wanted. I wanted a ministry. I wanted to help people. Dogs and cats are fine. I love them dearly, but I really wanted to help people. That's who I felt I truly was. And I wasn't doing what I thought I should be doing or could be doing. And anyhow, I started drinking, and I decided to seek psychiatric care. And so I went to a psychiatrist in Birmingham. He happened to be Jewish. And, they typically don't talk about religion, bring it up, but I forced the issue because that's what I always read about, and that's what I want to talk about. religion. Why aren't I doing what I think I could be doing? And so I was with him for 2 years. And he said, Gary, he said, you've got to make me a pledge. You can't come in here drunk. He said, because if you do, I'll cut you off. That's it. And he says, how much do you drink? And I said, 6-pack a night, sometimes a little wine to go with it. And he said, and you don't think that's too much? No, not at all. That's what I do every night. I loved red beer. I was either Killian's or Red Dog, if any of you are familiar with beers. And the little party store that was just 2 doors down from my townhouse in Clawson, they knew me, and they'd say if I didn't see my Killian's on the shelf, they'd say just go back in the freezer and see if you can find it back there. We might not have stocked it yet. I was a regular there. And if they didn't have any Killian's, then I just walked down to where Farmer Jack used to be, and they carried Red Dog all the time. And one of the stock boys there knew me by name, and he'd just tell me to go back and get it out of the stock room. But for me, that wasn't too much. But finally, I just got tired of coming home and drinking every night. That was my life, a solo life. And so I started psychiatric care. And through him unlocking some of those things that I wanted to keep locked up within me, and I really didn't want to face, I came to the realization that I could, through my veterinary practice, institute a type of ministry where I'm working with the people too, and realizing that I'm working with the people and not just the animals. And that really helped to save me. I really, really like that. Because I had felt for so long that I was missing my mark. You know what missing the mark means? The word that we use, little 3-letter word, it means sin. That's what sin literally means. You missed the mark. That's what it means. You missed the mark. And dukkha, you know what dukkha literally means in Pali and Sanskrit? It means a bent axle. Just think of an ox cart way back in Buddha's time in India. You know, so you got an axle that's bent like that. So you got one wheel of the cart that's moving really, you know, the way it should right here, and you got the other wheel that's moving like this. You know, and is the cart moving? Sure, it's moving, but it's not moving as well as it could, as efficiently as it could, as smoothly as it could. And that's what dukkha literally means. When we're disappointed in our lives, when we're disillusioned, we're dissatisfied, things just aren't quite what they should be. We're moving or acting like we got a bent axle. And I did that a lot. My strategy to quell that dukkha, that anxiety, that disillusionment, that dissatisfaction, that I wasn't expressing who I felt I was really deep down at the core of my being, my strategy was to drink and drown out those emotions. I mean, that was the get-go strategy for me. Some people do drugs. Some people do pornography. Some people shop too much. Some people eat too much. But they find a strategy to try and forget about that anxiety that's at the root of a lot of our being. And every once in a while we get lucky and we manage to address it. We overcome the fear of facing the fact that we're not who we thought we were or who we pretend to be. We get lucky. And I got there's a fellow who used to come here. He'd fly in from California, and I got permission to use his name and use his letter. I just got this letter 3 days ago. And I got his permission to use it because it is a very intimate letter. John is a computer guy. He's also a remarkable artist. He's 62 years old. And he used to fly into Detroit. He'd get a hotel, and he'd work on Carmano's Cancer Institute for 2 or 3 weeks on their computers. Then he'd fly back to California. Then 6 months later, he'd come back. And so he contacted me when he first got into town. I never knew who he was. And he called me up, and he said, hey, you know, I'm so-and-so. Can I come use your temple? You know, when I said, sure, the doors are always unlocked. Come use it, you know, whenever. So, you know, he's been here, you know, more than a few times. And I want to read you this letter that, like I say, I just received here. Reverend Heido, he is a Soto Zen Buddhist with Sonoma Mountain Zen Center in Santa Rosa up in wine country. and I've been out there before on a retreat. And he is, it's a big operation. It's 85 acres. They have all kinds of buildings on the property, and in fact, he was a number of years ago. They had a $5 million fund. They're raising money for improvements, and John was the treasurer of that fund. So here we go. Reverend Haydo. It was around this time of year when I first met you the first time, late autumn, a cold and rainy night. I had a job that required me to travel nearly constantly, and whenever I was in a new city, I'd search out a Zen or meditation center. It helped me keep in touch with discipline, with practice, with teaching, which goes on whether I'm there or not. And for that reason, I always likened it to having the same river always nearby. It was a way of finding the familiar and the welcoming. I'd found a Rinzai group in Tempe, Arizona, and was also a frequent guest at Prairie Wind Saga in Omaha, Nebraska, founded by the late Nonan Chanaway, who had been transmitted by Katagiri. I didn't know anything about Muddy Waters Inn or the Tego Order before showing up that night. I didn't even know if it was open to visitors for that matter, but you said I was welcome to sit while you took care of a few things at your clinic, and that we get acquainted should I still be there when you get back. When you did get back, you pulled up a zafu opposite me. We introduced ourselves, and shortly afterward you said, "Something's bothering you." I looked up. How does he know? As if you'd heard that, you continued. When you've been doing this as long as I have, you developed some observational skills. I can tell by the way you're sitting. I then unburdened myself. And that was we met a lot, but that was a really powerful night that first time. And we were both crying. It was just amazing. I unburdened myself. A crisis in my girlfriend's family had forced me to reconsider whether I was suitable material for her, given that she had 2 kids of a high school age who were exhibiting, if not delinquency, then at the very least some sociopathic leanings. You were immediately reassuring and said that blended families are one of the hardest things to take on. Even if everyone's compatible, it's still not easy. Don't expect perfection of yourself, John. We then started talking about family dynamics and how to correct for our shortcomings. I can't remember the exact context in which you said it, but at some point you said, every life has complications. I'm an alcoholic. You said it with such matter-of-factness, no drama, no magnified shame. You might have just as said, I'm a diabetic, no more Dunkin' Donuts for me. Or I've got high cholesterol, got to look right past those bacon cheeseburgers now. As I was driving back to the hotel that night, cold and rainy, I found myself thinking, he can admit that with such candor and ease. What the hell is my excuse? Not that I acted on this little epiphany right away at all. The New York Times columnist, op-ed columnist Frank Bruni once gave a talk out here at the Commonwealth Club of California. At the time, he was the food and dining editor. And while I don't remember much of his talk, I do remember this that he said. Anyone who's ever told themselves that they need to cut back their drinking, deep down know they really need to quit altogether, end of quote. That was some years later after I'd met you that night. And still, of course, quitting was something that might do me some good someday down the road. I live out here in wine country, as you know. You've been here. Grape trellises everywhere. It's the local economy and the local pastime. And it was my pastime for a good 20 years or more. And I didn't really notice my tolerance for it was slowly creeping up. I didn't notice that when shopping for the evening's wine selection, I reflexively started to allot 2, not 1 bottle anymore. You know, good to have one on hand. What started out as a glass or 2 at dinner enlarged, amoeba-like, into a 1+ bottle habit a night. And here's the thing. It's not like I was waking up every morning blind with a hangover. The problem is I wasn't. I was able to function this way. Certainly not ideally, of course, but I had little to compare it to. Sure, waking up at 4:30 in the morning, parched dry, and having to urinate was no fun. And I'm smart enough to link cause and effect. But every evening, when cooking dinner, a glass of red just seemed to accompany the activity perfectly. even seeing a longtime friend, someone with whom I'd go wine tasting with, conducted our own blind tasting events with someone with class and knew how to handle herself, now turned, when the first of several bottles are uncorked, into a chin on the chest, slurring and sloppy mess. Even seeing her like that was no impediment to my own habit. And the thing is, I like the flavors of it in all of its variety. I'm sure I still would. One of the lies I told myself was if I wanted the effect of alcohol, I'd be sucking down vodka. Like every alcoholic I'd ever met. You know, those guys who tell themselves that since vodka doesn't have any flavor or any smell, no one will ever know. It wasn't a crisis or the much fabled bottoming out experience. I just got tired of it. Tired of the behaviors, the hurrying up each morning to jettison the empties so I didn't have to see them later, the afternoon nap in the car, the hiding places I found, all of it. I had turned into one of those pathetic losers, the ones I felt so sorry for. Nowadays, I wake up fully rested. I don't need the afternoon nap either. I lost 7 pounds without needing to change any other routine. I can read a novel now and concentrate on it. And as much as I used to enjoy my Cabernet, all those things I'm talking about now are much better. This, of course, is no victory lap. There are still nights when I have to constantly and with extra determination decide not to browse that special aisle, but it has become easier to do. I recently turned 62. I've seen far more sunsets than I will see. My hypertension recently triggered a nosebleed that looked like Vesuvius, and it turns out to have caused some left heart enlargement. This was my first unmistakable realization that the final station on the track is nearer than I expected, as it is for all of us, I guess. But while we're both here, I wanted you to know that you woke me up that rainy, cold night so long ago. It took me a long time to get out of bed, to follow the metaphor, but you did wake me up. Infinite gratitude, John Cambray. So I got to help a guy out with a few words many moons ago, and he remembered them. Thank goodness for his sake. This is what our practice is all about. And here's a guy who goes to his temple, Sonoma Mountain Zen Center, all the time. He's a regular. He's a pillar there, and yet he managed to fool himself, to lie to himself, to kid himself. And how often do so many of us do that? I've told a number of our clergy that even though people tell me they've come here, they just want to find out what Buddhism is about or something else, a lot of it's a lie. Because a month down the road, a year down the road, they'll come to me and they'll say, I've got a drinking problem. I've got a relationship problem. I've got a work problem. That's what brought me here, really. They're trying to figure out how to handle their lives, how to do what it is that really deep down manifests who they are. And that's what we're coming here to do. We're coming here to manifest our Buddha nature, to develop infinite wisdom, infinite compassion. Thank you. So I've got a